being critical, students often see it as some really difficult thing, but it's not. I understand why being critical, it seems like this mystical thing, but it's not. And hopefully I'm going to show you as this presentation goes on. We all have the ability to be critical. It's just easier to do in certain places. Some people are naturally critical. I'm sure there are possibly students out there that say, I don't know how to be critical, and yet they are critical all the time. So it's to try and identify what being critical is and how it works, and how it, because it basically takes, there's one or two forms it takes in academia, being critical. And that's the way I understand it and the way I suggest students approach it. If you have any other way of thinking about it or doing it or whatever, that's absolutely fair enough. But it seems to work, and I'll show you why. Okay. So here's someone being critical. Bonus points to anyone. Bonus points to anyone who can work out what football team he supports. Just for the kudos. You won't actually get anything, but just for the kudos. So he's being critical. It's just a picture, but I know he's being critical. He's being critical because he's jabbing his finger and his face is all contorted. So he's being critical. But for me, as soon as I seen this picture, I said, that's how you sum up being critical. So this is one of the examples I'm going to give you. So let's take it that he's being critical of his goalkeeper in his team. I mean, it could be critical. It could be critical of the ref or anything. But let's say it's his goalkeeper and he's saying to his goalkeeper, you're shit. I wouldn't say that. He would say that. I wouldn't use the word shit. So you're problematic with your goalkeeping. Now, the reason, and he could probably be accurate in that because he knows what a goalkeeper should do. So in his head, he's got kind of theoretical information, the concept of goalkeeping. And the concept of goalkeeping is you keep the ball from going in the net. That's one of the key. Your job is to stop that ball going in the net. And good goalkeepers will perform these saves that stop that happening, right? The other thing he knows about goalkeepers is really good goalkeepers may go more than one match. They may go several weeks, several matches, and they don't let a goal in. Between them and the defense, they don't let a goal in. And, you know, high standard, high quality goalkeepers will make saves that stop the team ever losing goals for long periods of time. So he has that. That's his understanding of what a goalkeeper is. Okay. Now he's pointing at his goalkeeper and he's saying, you've let the ball go into the net 3 times and it's not half time. So not half the match has gone by. And already you haven't done your job 3 times and now they're up 3-0. That's why I am justified in saying you're shit. And that's the absolute, for me, that's the absolute principle of being critical, that you have information to say what something should be like, and you compare it with what is actually happening. And the difference or the comparison is you being critical. Whereas he could have been looking at his goalkeeper and going, that's 16 games and you've not let a goal in, you're fantastic. That would be the other thing. But that's not as funny. Just to recap so far, what it should be is used to evaluate, and this is often expressed by a theory, a model, or a concept, and it comes from academics. So it's academics that put forward, and that's what you learn about in modules. That's the theoretical part of modules that you find that out. Then they'll ask you to evaluate something, and that's when you go and you say, what is it? What it is, the thing being evaluated. And then at that point, you're looking for evidence of what happens practically, the thing being critiqued or evaluated. So you're looking for evidence that they're doing everything right, or you're looking for evidence that it's all gone on fire, whatever that may be. And that applies to everything. Going back to, and I think I've discussed this with you. I apologize for repeating this point, but I think it kind of relates here. That when you're doing a critical evaluation, you're trying to give something a score out of 10 in words. So when I said, I think I've asked you before, what score would you give the NHS? I think most people said they would give them, above 5, 6, 7, 8 for how they're performing. Okay. It might be less now. I mean, if you were, it might be, 5 or 6 or whatever, but it's still a positive thing. But then if I asked you to summarize, I should change that to Liz Trust. But Trump, if you said, what would score out of 10 would you give Donald Trump for what he achieved when he was president? And I've asked people, most people gave a low score. And all you have to do is you have to represent that low score in words. And so when you're reading about something, when you've been asked to evaluate something and you're starting to get the evidence together and it's not looking good, then you know that your essay is going to be mostly negative, because that's the information that's coming through to you, and you can make points about why it's not that good. Or if you get lots of things that come together and say, you're starting to read about it and say, well, this is really good. This thing called sliced bread, that's fantastic. This idea about sliced bread, that's really good, as the expression goes. So you'll be writing more positively about it, and that's the intent. So you're talking about all the positive. You're literally talking about the things in your report, about all the positive things that you can line up that says this is good. But that comparison between what is and what you have. So we're talking about. Well, I think we're talking about crim law, but yeah, we're talking about criminal law, and I know that you've been asked in criminal law to evaluate a specific law. Now, last year it was a different law, but I do know that the laws you've been asked to evaluate, you've been asked to look at the information about events and whether or not they should go to trial or not, whether there's a case to answer. But so you have to compare. So you have to compare things. So you have the facts of a case that you have to examine, and you have to say, should this case go to court? Is that fair enough? Is the criminal law, is that basically that assessment? You have to work out, given certain facts about an event that the police have intervened in, should this case go to court? Is that fair? So how you do that is, part of what you will do is you will look to previous case law of cases that have actually happened, and that will have information, that will have certain things that you can look at, which I'm going to number. I can't go into detail because I'm not a lawyer, but there may be 3 things that make a case, 3 things that you have to satisfy. And if you look at them, you'll start to notice the things that cases have. The things that went to court have certain features. And then you will look at the features of the information, the facts of the case that you have. And it may be, if it has a strong feature in one, and a strong feature of the second thing, and strong evidence of the other one. In actual cases that went to court, you can compare those with your case and say, yeah, there's a bit of that in the case. There's nothing there, and there's a lot of this. That's got three ticks. And that might say that no, there's not enough here, because there's no features of the second part in what I'm looking at. That's not a case. That case is not going to go to court. But you might get another one when you look at the 3 things, the 3 theoretical things that are involved. They've got all the things, and they've got them to a high extent. There's lots of evidence to say something's happened. Then you're going to say, yes, this case should go to court. But it's based on, it's that comparison between what you know that's shown to be. And a lot of that will come from actual case law, where you look at cases and say, this is a thing that made it a case. And then you can say, well, it doesn't have that. Is there still enough there to make it a case or not? So is that continual? So the critical is a comparison of, these are the standards. These are the things that says a case goes to court. And then you look for the evidence in your cases and other cases that have happened and compare them and say, this is why. And there'll be specific things where when you look at a case, you can kind of say, I understand why the police did something, or I understand why the police intervened here because there's these certain things. But when you actually look at the law and the understanding of the law as it's applied, it might not satisfy that. It might not satisfy that. It's not. So you can say, yeah, well, it's this and this, but it's like, for an example, it might be if you were doing somebody for some kind of threatening behavior or something like that, you might say that part of it is that, you know, the person had to feel threatened, they had to feel in fear of their life, they had to feel this and that. And or you might reasonably expect someone to be in fear of their life. So if you appear dressed as a clown, for example, and start going in front of somebody, you didn't intentionally mean that to do that. You know, you've done that. But if it might be the fact that the person felt in fear of their life, or they had a phobia of clowns or whatever, that you may end up in court and you didn't realize it. You thought you were just mucking about, but under the terms of the law, this person really felt in fear of their life, or they had, you know, and they had a phobia of clowns that you didn't know about, which is, you'd still end up going to court for that case because you're still satisfying it. And I think that for me is one of the things that people do things and they end up in court and they think well, what they did wasn't a big deal. But in the eyes of the law and what the law and the features of law say, this is a big deal. You just can't do that. And these are the things that you've got to look out for, basically. And it's tying those in. Now, the thing, let's see, hopefully, yeah, all right, okay. So before I move on to the slide, just to say that there will be lectures and there will be expressions of the law, and you'll be get shown how to understand the law and what's involved and how to apply it, kind of. And that's the things you've got to, so there will be certain lectures that will be helpful and explanatory in maybe going through a couple of scenarios, or going through the features that make what's a case and what's not a case, and how do you decide that. And then you'll understand that you just need to apply those things to those situations. And you'll probably find that one of your cases, for some obscure reason or for some certain features of the case, you may be looking at facts and you think that's not really a big deal, but that whether what you think is not important is what in the eyes of the law makes it. And you might say, gosh, that's a case and they have to go there. And the other one might be something that's, you would say, oh, that's definitely, or surely you can't do that. But again, when you analyze it with the features of the law, etc., then you say, oh, right, yeah, there's no case to answer because, and it'll be very small details. It's a small, for me, I think it's small details that become really important because of something they did or said or didn't do that carry some weight, or something that the defendant, the person, somebody that the person who's made the complaint or what the police scene have said, it's not quite. So just remember, generally, if you were evaluating something, so I mean, when you say about criticism, it can be positive and negative. What you can say is when you are making this evaluation of whether it should be a case, you could say it goes part of the way towards the threshold for it being a case, for it being something you send to the procurator, or the procurator fiscal's got this, and the procurator fiscal's sitting there. There can be positive things in a case that say, yes, this is something that needs to go to court, right? But there will be negative things, and if there's enough negative things, it will not pass the threshold to go to court. So there will be, when you look at it in the round, you'll be saying, well, I understand why the police did something. I understand why they do it because it's this, this, and this are all points that kind of lead to it being something that goes to court. But there's this big thing, or there's this other thing that stands out, and that kind of undermines that. So it's a mix of things. And if you can express a mix of things and say, I understand why it is and I understand why it isn't, that's going to be a more rounded, more informative view that will get you more marks So it's the best way, in some ways, I mean, that's this procurator fiscal thing deciding to do what court case goes to courts is kind of a more unusual one. The basic critique is there that you understand what the law is and what the law asks for and what it means if you've broken the law, and you compare that to the facts of the case, have they broken the law? That comparison is definitely there, as I've said, that comparison of the theory and what's practically happened. But just as another thing, just to say that there may be other things you're asked to do where it's not quite in that same vein. And all I want to say is it's kind of like a cinema review or a theatrical review in terms of that mix, where very rarely does a movie get 5 stars, and very rarely does a movie get 1 star or no stars. It usually sits in between. It's usually got a mix of, there's enough in this movie to make you go and watch it, but there are definite things that detract from it. And I mean, I think I see a lot of movies where I say, I'm happy I watched that, but I was disappointed in this part or this part. I was disappointed in the ending, but overall, it wouldn't have stopped me watching the movie. So it's that kind of mix. And to think about it if you're a critic, critics have real knowledge about the areas that they critique. So Mark Kermode on the BBC does the movie things. He does the movie and he's really good at it because he knows so much about them. So again, the more you read, if you're trying to be critical, the more you read, the better that will be for you. Right. So, and sometimes I'm not saying this is necessarily for this assessment. Well, it could be, but sometimes you can be critical by asking questions of the thing that you're interrogating. And I just want to run through some of these. When it comes to laws, if you were to evaluate a law, which is another, maybe in another module or something you're asked to do, but if I use that as an example, how good is a law? How well does it work? Then one of the first questions, if you answer this question, then you're being critical or you're assessing it or you're evaluating. Is it effective? If you're looking at anything, is it effective or ineffective? How well does it do the job it's supposed to do? And if you stand out, it's effective because it does this, this, and this, and this, but perhaps it's ineffective because it's not quite this, this, and this. That's really good. And you'll find that it's not like it's not effective, it's effective or it's ineffective. It's effective in some ways and in other ways it's not. That's usually it. Is it risky or safe? Maybe that one doesn't apply, but that can be. Well, does a law put people in danger? For some, inadvertently, is there a law that actually puts people at risk by if they have to adhere to this law or do this law? Does it actually make the situation unsafe for them? Sometimes that might actually be possible, I guess. This is another good one. So you might have an effective law and you might have a safe law. So it's effective, it does what it's supposed to, and it's not causing anybody any danger, but hey, people don't like it for whatever reason. So if you can bring in what the population in general thinks about a law, I think that can be valid in its criticism. That you can say, well, yeah, it's all well and good, but people don't like that, perhaps for other reasons, because you can have a law, a legal determination of something that you can do or you can't do, but there's also an ethical standpoint, which and laws doesn't. I would argue that laws don't. Ethics are not the same as laws. Ethics, you can have a law which you can look at and say is kind of, you could say is unethical, because ethics is something slightly different, which is not it's a kind of a right or wrong, but it's in a different way. So you could have, for example, same-sex marriage, abortion. There are certain controversial laws that may be popular or unpopular for certain reasons. And some people will, based on their beliefs or their ethics or morality or whatever, say this is wrong. And there are all people who will say it's right. And it's, there can be really difficult laws. but that's something you can comment on and it's something to assess it on. Does it create or solve problems? Usually laws are solve problems, keep people safe, avoid people from harm, but sometimes you can get a law and you're just like, oh no, this just isn't working. I think there were some laws in Scotland recently that were kind of demonstrated against it. They created problems, or you couldn't enforce them or something like that. Certain laws, there was those kind of things. Who benefits from the law? That's an interesting one. Does the government bring in a law that just suits it? Like recently, they were going to change the laws on protests, that it was going to make it more difficult for people to protest. Funnily enough, they're bringing these laws in just when the government seems to be, I don't want to get too technical, but making a complete arse of everything. I mean, I'm just going by what the papers are saying generally and what people are saying on the news. It's not my personal opinion. Yeah. So who does it benefit when you put laws against unions, when you make laws against protesting? Who benefits from that law? Is that somebody that benefits the freedom of speech and people saying or whatever, or does it benefit the government clamping down on things? And also, where does it work best? I don't really have an example for this one. Thinking of where does it work best? So there might be, you might get a situation where there's a circumstance that this law is ideal for. This is where this law really works well, and that's where it happens. But anyway, these are the 6 or 7 questions that really help for you to set up evaluation if you've got nothing to start from. When you're reading case law, you're reading journal articles, you're reading your books, you can say, I'm looking at talking about its popularity, I'm looking for something that talks about its effectiveness, I'm looking for something that reads about how beneficial this is to society in general or whatever. Then you've got a hook. These questions are all hooks to apply to a reading to extract the things of a critical nature. So when it comes to the source, where does your critique come from? In my mind, there are 3 options, but they vary in importance where you should or should not get them from. Okay, so I would say mainly when you're looking for the evidence that something's effective, the evidence of what it benefits or whatever, you're going to be using academics. Like, the majority, the vast majority of the sources that you use in your essays are going to be from academics and academic books. So you might get, Can 2021 says, asserts that this law is problematic. There's an issue with this law. Ideal, because that's an academic. And the reason you tend to use academics more, as I've said before, is it's rigorous, accurate information that's not just thrown together. These journals, these books, they're edited, they're reviewed. You don't publish something lightly. Okay, you sweat and stuff over publishing papers and the other thing is the people that write them are complete experts in it as well. So there's more chance of, not to say you don't get academic stuff that's maybe not, it's a bit dubious, that happens, unfortunately, but you have more chance of, or you can use opinion. So there might be a newspaper article where people have interviewed judges. What I would say is when you're talking to judges or what judges say or what judges think, they have an authority to be able to express an opinion. So the opinion of people who know what they're talking about is valid. The one thing I'm always interested in is when they stop people in the street on news things and they say, so what do you think of this latest? What do you think of the North Island Protocol? Like, they're not an expert. I'm not dissing, but they're no experts. Well, where are they getting that? What do they know? But they'd love thrusting a microphone and say, what do you think of that? Oh, that's rubbish. That's terrible. That should never happen. And you're like, well, that's good. The general public think it's rubbish. I don't know if I'd agree with that, but there you go. I just think it's a very interesting thing they do. Right. So, but if the opinion's worthwhile, if the opinion comes from a judge, a legal expert, something like that, then you could use that. And it says many judges say the law presents courtroom issues. So that's, and you might get the practical side of it. okay, that in the courtroom, in the practical application of this law, there's going to be problems. And that opinion can supply that for you. And then, and then you can use logic. So if you combine those two, you can add your voice to it, and you can say, therefore, theoretically and practically, this law has issues. So in the courtroom has issues, and Can, speaking theoretically, says there's issues about this. Okay. And the final thing you can do is you can use examples and say, this case shows how the issues were handled. So this case shows you the problems that they were unable to decide, or this case or this example shows. So these are the ways that you can show your critique. You can do it through the academics, through the opinion of people that know what you're talking about, or basically you yourself thinking about what's been written and logically coming to some conclusions. That's not the best one I've ever written, but that's basically what it is. So don't be afraid to say, well, if that's that and that's that, you can infer, you can surmise that this is going to be something or that's going to be something. You'll get marks for all of those when they're used properly, and you'll get marks for examples that help back up what you're saying. So don't be afraid to make intelligent suggestions or theories. So when you look at something, you might look at several things. So you might line up lots of things that point to why a law is ineffective or something. And they've not said, it's not been said, but when you look at the wealth of information, or you look at something, when you see evidence for something and it's not been said in the papers, but it comes to you from looking at all the different, don't be afraid to say, it looks like because of this, this, and this might happen. Because of what I've understood and found out, this is a possible scenario, or this is possibly a problem. That's reasonable to say. That's absolutely fair. That's not a problem. And then again, just to say, another important thing is conclusions are usually a mix. So it's you may talk about something, you can say, in terms of this, in terms of being effective, as I said before, in terms of being effective, it is partly effective. It does this and this, but it turns out it's got this flaw in it, or it's got this part in it that doesn't fully prosecute people, or it lets people away with it, or it doesn't, there's a loophole in it, or there's something people can do. That's often the case with laws, that there's a loophole or something that you can therefore navigate it and say, well, I'm not breaking the law. Now, if that law is brought in to stop things happening that are not beneficial to society, when somebody uses a loophole, you can then say, well, ethically that's not very good, but maybe that's another story. But that's where the argument comes in, that it's not just completely bad or completely good, or doesn't benefit society completely, but it may have some benefits, but it also has things it doesn't. And the other one is, if something comes up, if you feel you don't think you've got to try and make one side of it or the other, to say it's a good law or it's a bad law, and that's the way, that's what I'm going to make it look like, that's what I want to do. You've got to bring in everything. So if you've got a strong argument that says this law is really good, and then you spot something that detracts from that, don't ignore it. Bring in everything you find, because you'll have a more balanced, you'll have more references, you'll have more balance in your argument, that you've considered everything, and you'll have a more complex story. So don't try and say, I want to say this is a good law, I think it's a good law, so I'm going to ignore something that takes away from it. Don't do that. Just point it out. You'll get more marks for making a balanced argument with both sides than you will for trying to make it fit what you want. Because the people that are marking it will know, and they'll just go, oh, so you've just not talked about this, so you've not looked at this. When you're making a claim about something, just remember it's in 3 parts, or possibly 4 parts. Possibly 4 parts, definitely 3 parts. And I want to do this with a fairly simple claim. Smartphones save lives. That's my claim, right? Fairly simplistic. So you have to have a claim in 3 parts. So that you have the claim, then you have the reason why it does what it does, and then you explain the processes as to how that happens. And I'm saying this because what I tend to get a lot with people is they make a claim and then they either give the reason, but they don't say how, or they say how, but they don't give a reason why. And if you have the three parts, your claim is solid and your claim stands up to because you've explained everything that the person needs to know. So there's elements in each that are critical to you making the. So make the claim. So that's green. So let's look at the sentence. It's all broken down. Smartphone saves lives. Okay. Why do they save lives? Well, they allow direct communication and they identify where you are. So you can, if you have a smartphone, you can talk to people directly. And the other thing about smartphone is the smartphone knows where it is at any given time. So that's it. But then again, but how? But how? So you need to explain. This means you've got to spell it out. You may already understand in your head why that's the case, but you have to spell it out and you say, this means you can contact people for help and they can find out where you are if you are lost, allowing you to be found. So it's basically that example of, and I see that in the next part of the examples, there's evidence. Can you bring any kind of practical evidence in to say that actually happens? Because it's okay to say smartphones save lives because they do this. But if nobody actually does it, or it's not used in that way, or nobody knows, then technically, theoretically, it's only saving lives. It's not actually practically saving. So you get this practical example of, you say, there are numerous examples where people were lost or trapped in the wild and have contacted the authorities. The phone signal lets the rescuers know where the person are and they can be rescued. So you're spelling it out again. This is a really good claim, well supported. It is difficult to argue with. That's the important thing because you've expressed everything in it. So when you're trying to make the claims, make sure you have those elements within them to some degree. Booyah, that's us finished.